Greetings, family. This is Iapo Moyende Ngina, otherwise known as the Rogue Black Girl. So I had so much fun. My idea of fun, I know, can be confusing, but I had so much fun last night reading from the book The Great Cosmic Mother that I decided that I'm going to go ahead and do like a political education series, but it won't always be from the same material. So today, while I was at work, I was thinking a lot just about my past political experience. I don't know why it came up in my head, but there's a piece, people who have worked with me in committees or under my leadership under particular periods of work. So people that I've tagged in this, if you've ever worked with me, you've already read this piece, but there are some pieces to me that are like standard introduction political education pieces that never get old. They always are poignant and they always just kind of bring you back to center, bring you back to focus. So this particular piece that I'm going to share with you tonight is a game changer, always is. I'm going to tell you a quick story though. So I was leading a piece of work, the last major piece of work that I participated in. I was functioning as the lead organizer for the first annual Black Power Awards. This piece of work was enormous for a number of reasons. One, I was not in the city where the majority of the committee members were, and there were about 22 people who came forward to help make that piece of work happen, right? So leading a committee from outside of the area where the event is happening and where the majority of the organizers live, that was new for me. And the other thing was coming into that piece of work, I had developed, based on my past political experience, a level of what I call kind of like political elitism. And we all do it, whether we're, well, I don't want to say we all do it, but a lot of us do it based on our own beliefs. We get so locked into our own personal beliefs, we say that we're not going to do X, Y, and Z. So for me, my past political experience had forced me to, kind of take this position that there were certain types of people I would never do work with, right? I'm not going to name those folks, but I will just not like those type of folks or those organizations, but there were organizations, there were groups that I had said I would never do political work with. And that is not, to me, it's not correct. We can't move forward politically if we cannot step outside of our comfort zones, develop like a core points of unity, where even if ideologically we may not have the same view, that at the end of the day, we care about our people, we care about the future, and we would never do harm to our folk. And that is enough for us to move forward politically, even if we don't agree ideologically, right? So that was the first big hurdle for me, was getting past this kind of political elitism that I had developed as a consequence of past work, right? So on this committee, there were all kind of people. There were Christians, hardcore Christians. There were brothers and sisters from fraternities and sororities. There were a few wealthy people on the committee. There were Hebrew Israelites on the committee. There were Nubians on the committee. Like everybody that you can possibly imagine ideologically stepped forward to participate in the committee to build this piece of work, right? So I said, okay, I will take on leading this committee. The first month, I would say the first 3 weeks of doing that work were very difficult because we had established that there were several subcommittees that we needed to have functioning under this whole body. And we needed people to step forward to assume leadership for those subcommittees. And what I quickly discovered is that people, even if they were enthusiastic about the work in general, may not have had the confidence to take on those positions of leadership. They, in their mind, say, okay, well, I don't have experience in this area of work, so I can't lead it. or what have you. And even with me struggling with people that I would do personal trainings with them before giving them a piece of work, right? It still didn't, for 3 meetings, 3 weeks, I could not get a single volunteer to take on a leadership role for several of our important subcommittees. That leads me into this political education tonight. So at the beginning of every meeting, before every meeting, I would email the committee members a piece for them to read. And then the first 10 to 15 minutes of the meeting, we would do a political education before starting the meeting. Okay. So they would receive the email. They would have to read it before the meeting, come into the meeting prepared to discuss the piece that I had emailed them, and no one could remain silent. Everybody had to give a position on the piece that we had read. So up until this point, we'd been doing some general political education, but I couldn't get any volunteers for my subcommittees. So I emailed them this political education. It's difficult. I don't think you can find it online. I've looked before and I've just had to find old copies of it and retype it out. But if you're interested in it, I can email it. I have typed it out. But this political education, I read, we discussed at the beginning of the meeting, and by the end of that meeting, after this political education, every last one of my subcommittees was filled. Not only were they filled, each person that took on leadership for that subcommittee, I did an individual 2.5-hour training with them so that they were equipped to be successful in the work. I didn't just send them out there and tell them to figure it out. I trained them and gave them the tools necessary to be successful in the piece of work that they took on leading. So with that being said, and that kind of lengthy introduction, I want to discuss with you, read to you, and people can ask me questions during this. I'm not responding when I see you come up, but people can ask me questions and I'll attempt to answer those questions during this live feed. So the article that we're going to be discussing today is called The Disease, the Fear of Responsibility. This piece was delivered by Ho Chi Minh. This was a speech that was delivered by Ho Chi Minh. And this was right after the end of the Vietnam War, when they were attempting to rebuild their society after this war. The subtitle is Whoever Fears Responsibility Does Not Have Opinions and Is Not a Leader. So this is by Ho Chi Minh. Oh, another disclaimer, just very quickly. So I am always saying how we have to look at our past and attempt to use from the past what we can and apply it, not dogmatically, apply it how we can to our current situation, right? So one of the problems of the past is we attempt to look at the past and try to superimpose the past on our current situation exactly the same. And the circumstances, the social circumstances are not the same. Doesn't mean that the information from the past is not useful. It means we have to look at it, rework it in a way that applies and is useful in our current situation. So I want you to be mindful of that when I'm reading this. This was a new and emerging Vietnam who had just spent so many different generations under some imperial power. They had been colonized by French and by the United States and by the British and by the Chinese. And so this was an independent, emerging Vietnam that was attempting to rebuild itself after the Vietnam War. Okay, so, but it's still so relevant. This was written in 1973 and it's still so relevant. So I'll begin. Again, for those just tuning in, this is The Disease, the Fear of Responsibility by Ho Chi Minh. Our northern part of Vietnam has entered a period of socialist growth with an ever increasing and better results. The responsibility of restoring and developing the economy the culture of consolidating defense and raising the people's standard of living is posing new and complex problems which must be resolved promptly and correctly. Confronting this situation, the cadre, the party member who is involved in building and carrying out the government policy, has to have a high sense of responsibility and strength to do their job well, to contribute to the development of all the advantages, to conquer all of the difficulties before us, and to push all of the activities in the right direction that quickly moves society forward. In every activity and position, each cadre, each party member has to move forward in the struggle to establish the new economy, the new system, the new people in the socialist system, while thinking and acting in the revolutionary spirit with the idea of leading the group, always being sensitive to the new and developing self in the job, while struggling strongly against any idea or policy which is against the party and remaining firm against the conservative, passive, or negative idea. Comrade Ledouin said, "The leader has to have faithful character and be hardworking when applying the party policy in government. One has to have enough ability and strength to carry out policy. One must have knowledge, experience, foresight, sensitivity to new ideas, have new ideas, be highly dynamic, coordinate the group with the ability to lead, make clear decisions, and know well the job and the situation before him. The quest is that the cadre have high responsibility, but now among the cadre there is a fear of responsibility." Okay? I'm sorry. I've read this piece 10,000 times and I'm always moved by it because I can see clearly that the situation and the circumstances never change. They never change. They're always the same. The problems are all the same. Anyway, I'll continue. The person who fears responsibility works only within what he is told to do, so as to not make any big mistakes. If one always worries about taking responsibility for what is happening, they will not develop for this reason. They will not want to change things which are wrong, but would rather go along doing things the same old way. When one fears responsibility, they become conservative. Uncle Ho said, "Conservative character, one who has no opinion, who goes along with others, one who does not think about new ideas and is afraid to think of new ideas, one who does not want progress. The society is developing more and more each day, and new ideas and actions must develop. If we only keep in the old way with no change, we will go nowhere. The person who fears responsibility is always shy, indecisive when they make a decision, does not explain himself well in trying to make his own opinion clear, and does not want to make judgments in their job which involve his or her responsibility. Because of their fear of responsibility, the cadre waits passively for an order from the higher ranks. Before the new job, they only sit waiting for the order from the high rank." Woo! Before the new job, okay, from the high rank, not finding out for oneself or proposing the decision beforehand. With the job, there's a clear order, but they prefer to wait for a guideline with much detail from high-ranking persons before beginning to act, not strongly deciding the method or measure to apply quickly and coincide with the reality of their local unit or area. The person who fears responsibility is always reasons to work with the group, respects the group, then depends upon the group. With the job belonging to their responsibility, the person who is afraid of responsibility does not decisively solve their own job. And even with a small responsibility, will always ask for a group opinion, waiting for a group decision, making it easier for them to decide. The person who brings the job that they're supposed to do into group discussion only mentions it in general that they feel uncomfortable, but does not clearly express their own opinion or make any suggestions in their own job. Whew. The revolutionary must have individual responsibility. The group is necessary in the important decisions, but it is necessary to have individual responsibility and individual control to avoid red tape and to avoid escaping responsibility. We need people who in any situation can find their way to administer with an independent spirit. Lenin said that. The person who fears responsibility is afraid to disagree or be against the other cadre in the unit, whether with high-ranking people or with people under them, because it would hurt relationships. Hear me now, okay? Because it would hurt relationships, they use, quote, cautious maturity to keep, quote, solidarity. They are not honest and do not criticize the person who has made the mistake. They do not struggle against the passive and those opinions, They do not struggle against the passive and those whose opinion is against the direction of the party and the government. To avoid a misunderstanding with high-ranking person, one who is afraid of responsibility will not strongly express their ideas or view on a subject that they might not quite have right yet and still needs change. To keep in good relationship with low-ranking persons, the cadre avoids the subject or judges only gently, not seriously criticizing him or strongly requesting correction and error. The disease of responsibility on the part of the cadre. The disease is the fear of responsibility on the part of the cadre. These party members are obstacles to the activities of the party and the government. They keep others from developing, fail to make corrections on time, cause many mistakes, and keep energy level low. The fear of responsibility is a failure of ideology, of revolutionary quality of cadre, party members, because the disease of fear of responsibility is a desire to be left alone, to avoid the difficult and lack of spirit of struggle, lack of revolutionary strength against the spirit of sacrifice for revolution, determined struggle against oppression, corruption, poverty, hunger, and ignorance. The spirit of responsibility is the standard requirement of each cadre. Each cadre, Each cadre was given a decisive duty by the party and the government. The faithful character of the cadre with the party and the people is a demonstration of quantity, ability, and spirit of the cadre who never fears of fatigue, overcomes all difficulty, and in any condition. The cadre tries to bring all the strength and ability to complete the responsibility which is given. That is the spirit of responsibility and of the revolutionary cadre. The fear of responsibility, avoidance of all difficulties, whiling away the time for work's sake, being a spectator before all the right or wrong. This is the way of the old-fashioned civil servant. It is not the character of the revolutionary. When discussing the principal standard for selecting cadre, Demetov said, the cadre must have the independent ability to make decisions in all conditions and fear to take the responsibility about their decisions. The person with fear of responsibility is not a leader. The person who does not have their own opinion and only knows to think, quote, I only do what the people tell me to do, they are not a Bolshevik. The origin of the fear of responsibility is individualism. Because the person always worries about personal benefit, protects their individualism, and loses all struggle spirit and lacks the spirit of responsibility and firm principle when they solve problems, lacks the fear of confrontation with difficulties, fear of thinking and of acting because he cannot be bothered. For that reason, if one wishes to prevent fear of responsibility, one must be against individualism, raise the revolutionary spirit of the cadre and the party members, and give every person sacrifice spirit for the revolution, faithful to the party, dutiful with the people, finish all the jobs, overcome all the difficulties, and win over all enemies, as Uncle Ho taught. The person who has fear of responsibility has objective conditions to survive and advance. In some cases, the disease of responsibility has created some mistakes in the guidelines of the group. Now, there are some organizations and divisions which have not clearly decided the limitation and responsibility of each individual. For that reason, they cannot judge individual right or wrong because they are only mistakes by the group. There are high-ranking cadre who do not respect the responsibility and the competence and ignore the opinions of the low-ranking cadre and solves the problems of the low-ranking members themselves. This makes the cadre become easily dependent, passive, and avoid their personal responsibility. There is, in the case of the leader who does not object to listening There is the case of the leader who does not object to listening to the opinion of the low-ranking, but he only wants to hear flattery and agreement with them and doesn't want to hear low-ranking opinions contrary to their own, and does not encourage the expression of independent opinion in lower ranks, does not foster the development of ideas and honest expression. The character of this leader is to support cadre who fear responsibility, who are only doing what they are told to do. There are cadres who have the wrong definition of responsibility. Those who are easygoing, who are, quote, tolerant, who never criticize, never bother the other cadre, easy in all cases, even when the principles have been broken, and they think it is good for solidarity and good for popularity. This same cadre condemns the person who honestly criticizes, who tries to struggle against the passive, conservative ideas and actions which go against the government and the party line. It seems that the character of this cadre is to encourage cadre who fear responsibility. Overcoming the fear of responsibility quickly raises the spirit of strict responsibility and resolute determination, especially in the leaders, guides, and managers, are significant work in order to push the activities of each branch and level and guarantee complete success in the political duties facing us. To elevate the quality and efficacy of the cadres, to realize efficiently the resolution of the political bureau concerning the task of the cadre in the new period. This work, before everything, requires enthusiasm and training of every cadre party member, and at the same time, it also requires the party organizations and country organizations to improve their tasks. Define precisely the responsibilities and duties of the collective and of the individual to perform well the synthesis of the tasks based on the party line and the police and the concrete duty given to every person. One has to put forward the persons who work well, criticize the person who does not work well, and have the right concept and correct attitude in examining and evaluating each cadre. So again, that was Fear of Responsibility, the disease, the Fear of Responsibility by Ho Chi Minh. There are a couple of things that I want to go back to because I read it kind of fast. Hold on. I read it kind of fast and but I wanted to discuss or at least elaborate for those just tuning in. That was, if you caught the last of it, that was The Disease, the Fear of Responsibility by Ho Chi Minh. So this piece, again, is, to me, it is one of those political education. When we say political education, I think sometimes we have the idea, not even have the idea. Sometimes it manifests itself as only the consumption of information. Like, I hope that I'm clear. We consume information, but we have a difficult time sometimes making what we've acquired become a material force, something that transforms our behavior, something that fortifies the ability for us to solve problems. So the example that I gave at the opening of this political education was how this particular political education, this particular piece by Ho Chi Minh functionally helped me solve a problem when doing this major piece of work, right? That is seeing the political education, using the political education, and it having a direct effect in the real world on the piece of work that you have in hand, right? So when we talk about political education, the thing that we always have to be conscious of is how can this new information transform my behavior or be useful to my purpose in the material world, right? That's why I keep going back to this. I've been reading this piece for 20 years. It's always relevant. And so some of the things that I think stand out to me in this, I really appreciate how clear he is in describing how the fear of responsibility manifests itself, right? So one of the things he talked about was, this one is great. This one is great. The person who fears responsibility always reasons to work with the group, respects the group, and then depends upon the group. With the job belonging to their personal responsibility, the person who is afraid of responsibility does not decisively solve their job. And even with a small responsibility, will always ask for a group opinion, waiting for a group decision, making it easier for them to decide. The person who brings the job that they're supposed to do to the group discussion only mentions in general that they feel uncomfortable, but does not clearly express their own opinion or make any suggestions in their job. So, whether you're doing political work, whether you're at your actual job, whether you are even in your family, these have a very real way of solving familial problems, as far as I'm concerned, community problems. So here, this one is saying one of the manifestations of the person who fears responsibility is one who hides inside the group, who hides inside organization. They never step forward with new ideas. They never step forward with solutions to problems, but instead are always waiting. Even if they have an idea, because of the fear, they do not put their ideas forward, but instead wait for the group to give an opinion about their job and then give an opinion about how they need to solve their job or to do their job. So it's against the revolutionary spirit to be hiding up inside organization, to not continually be bringing fresh ideas and solutions to the problems. Here we're taught, this is within the context of a people who had just been brutalized by the United States government, saying now we have the responsibility of restoring the government for our own benefit, solving the problems that have come as a consequence of revolutionary struggle, right? And colonialism, for that matter. And so these were not issues that were light for a person to not have revolutionary spirit, for a person to be fearful about bringing fresh ideas to solve the problem of the government, to solve the problem of the society. That's what we're talking about. But here we are living, about those of us who are political activists, who are, quote, self-proclaimed revolutionaries, whatever your bag is. We are not in the height of armed struggle or armed warfare, but we still find it difficult to solve the most basic problems within the context of doing work together. We get stuck on the details. We don't bring fresh ideas. I had this discussion the other night with this young lady who is on fire for the movement. And I could tell she got a little demoralized when I told her that outside of an overall strategy, I don't do protest politics. Been there, done that. And I'm going to go back to something that spoke to this. This is not a judgment. I do not want anybody to be angry or in your feelings. This is my personal opinion. I don't do protest politics. Demonstrations, protests, mass action, like that kind of stuff. I don't do it because when we talk about bringing fresh ideas or going back, he also talked about doing things the same old way and expecting a different result. That it has to be the revolutionary, the visionary that brings fresh ideas, fresh enthusiasm to the work to solve new and emerging problems, right? So that's one thing he talked about that I felt was really important, was how, so, and you know that person, whether they're the person at your job or whether they're the person inside your political organization, they never step forward with anything new, any contribution. They just lay in the cut. They're silent most of the time. They just, Mao Zedong call it tolling the bell. They just, quote, do the work, quote, do the work. And the organization that I was tied to before, the chairman used to say, for those of you who grew up in the church, there's this scripture in the Bible that says faith without works is dead. Most Christians don't pay attention to that, but whatever. Faith without works is dead. And he said the revolutionary version of that is theory without practice is idle. Theory without practice is vain. And practice without theory is idle. I'm going to say that again. Theory without practice is vain. And practice without theory is idle. You just doing the work with no goals, no objection. You just protesting, right? You just going to every demonstration you can go to. You just, doing Facebook posts and Facebook lives. But there is no strategy that these actions are tied to. There is no long view that these actions are tied to. You just, as long as you moving, that's the movement. As long as you going to lectures, that's the movement, right? And so that's what practice without theory and theory without practice means. So here you have this new and developing Vietnam, and that gave the United States a run for its money, saying, how do we, as the new government, the people, how do we redevelop a Vietnam that meets the needs of the people, adheres to the line of the party, and grows the rank and file to be individual. See, we're not talking about individualism the way we understand it in the West. He's calling for individual spirit within the revolution, but as long, I don't want to misquote. He's talking about he's opposed to individualism, but encourages individual revolutionary spirit, problem solving, fresh ideas, all within the context of the group. So that's another one I'll get into a little later because it's important. This whole concept of individual spirit versus individualism. Individualism is opportunism. It's based on the self in spite of the group. Individual spirit is bringing fresh ideas and spirit from the individual within the context of the group. I hope that's clear. So anyway, another one that I know we've all experienced, we've all seen, because sometimes we call them suck-ups, right? The person who fears responsibility works only within what he or she is told to do as to not make any big mistakes. If one is always worried about taking responsibility for what is happening, they will not develop for this very reason. They will not want to change things which are wrong. We know these people. If we've been doing revolutionary work, we know these people. They will not want to change things that are obviously wrong, but would rather go along doing things the same old way. The same old way. When one fears responsibility, they become conservative. The conservative character is one who has no opinion, who goes along with others, one who does not think about new ideas and is afraid to think of new ideas, one who does not want progress. One who does not want progress. What does it mean to not want progress? We talked, I don't know if people tuned in to the interview that Sister Rolanda conducted the other day, but we talked in part about this problem that we have, where we get hogtied by tradition, and to not be able to understand the foundational significance of tradition, but also be able to determine what traditions hold us back and what traditions move us forward, and how tradition and culture is transformed by the new and developing person, self, in the new and developing society, right? Traditions are not stagnant. Traditions are always evolving as the human race is evolving. But what happens is because we live in a patriarchal society that benefits from those, quote, old ways that keep people oppressed, because there's a ton of traditions that we can point to that are of no use and of no benefit to anybody but one particular type of individual, right? So here, that's what it means. When we're talking about spirituality, when we're talking about culture, when we're talking about tradition, we're still talking about politics. We're still talking about, these are not separate concepts. And that's been the problem for a long time. And I talk about it all the time, this divorce between African spirituality and African political life. And I'm not just talking about Africans. Any colonized people, this separation that's been imposed on us between our between our spiritual traditions, the traditions of our ancestors, and political life, right? So we can see it across the board. I've been spending a lot of time with indigenous people, both so-called Mexican, Mexica people here and Native American people here, and across the board. I would guarantee everywhere colonized people are, that have had some contact with the white world, have had these divisions imposed on us, and we can't figure out why we can't move forward. A lot of the time, these so-called traditions have been imposed on us, but they're so old and we've been participating in them so long, we think it's something that came from us when it came from outside of us. I hope I'm being clear. But here he's saying that the person who has a conservative character does not want progress, is hogtied to the old ways, those ways that do not benefit the group, but instead hold the group back. And so it is the person who does not experience the fear of responsibility, who challenges old ways, who brings new ideas to the group to say, this is how we can make major leaps forward, right? The person who fears responsibility is always shy, indecisive when they make a decision, does not explain himself well, and trying to make his own opinion clear, scared to death to be wrong, scared to death to be criticized, scared to death to have someone say, well, comrade, I don't think that idea is going to work for this particular situation, but let's try it another time. So we've seen this person too, that as opposed to being challenged, and I'm talking about challenged in the revolutionary spirit. See, the other thing is we fear critique, because in a world that is hostile to people of color, in a world where people of color are colonial subjects of the empire, we are accustomed to critique always being negative. We get criticized by our boss. We get criticized by our wives or our husbands, but it's always negative. It's not for personal growth or to right error. It is always to demoralize or denigrate, if I'm being clear. So within the context of the party, Ho Chi Minh's party, the new and developing Vietnam, critique was necessary to first of all get rid of old ideas that had been imposed on the Vietnamese that kept them from making progress. Two, to be able to correct errors. When somebody is in error, he talks about this. We don't say nothing about it. We do this in the movement all the time. Because we don't keep it in the political context. I know when I say the movement, I'm saying people who call themselves conscious, people who say, people, any kind of conscious, whether it's spiritually conscious, politically conscious, all these circles that we run in, we will witness wrongdoing. We will witness someone gone astray and keep it a secret. Do not challenge. Do not criticize. That ain't got nothing to do with me. It's not my responsibility. Whose responsibility is it? We're talking about changing the world, right? We're talking about establishing a new order, a new world. What does it look like in the real world? How do you right wrongs? Whether they personally affect you or not, how do we hold each other accountable in a way that helps us move forward as a group with high character? So I think I've talked enough about this piece. If you're interested in receiving this piece via email, you can shoot me an inbox. You can email me at iyapoengina@gmail.com. That's IYAPONGINA@gmail.com. I will email you the piece, because once you can sit with it, and it's a great self-critiquing piece, because sometimes in our day-to-day lives, we we backslide, for lack of a better term. But it's the political education that has the potential to rescue us. It really does. The one I'm going to do next, probably in a few days or maybe next week, is Combat Liberalism by Mao Zedong. Baby, when I tell you it's a game changer, the problems are exactly the same. And the importance, this is the last thing I'll say, the importance of political education, these type of political educations, is not just in general people who had great ideas. The political education pieces that I prefer to use are coming directly from people who have had victorious revolutionary struggles. We need to look at the people who won their shit and see what they did, what errors they made, what gains they made, and how can we apply what's useful from their struggle. That's what we have to be doing. That's not to say that we don't have the ability to. Political education is endless, but I'm saying that's what I prefer to use at this juncture. I want to know what's successful, what's useful, what's historically going to benefit us. So with that being said, I guess I will close out. This is Yapo Moyende-Ngina, and this is going to be a part of an ongoing political education series. Tell somebody, tag somebody if you're interested, or if the information is useful to you.